So during the Victorian era, the Industrial Revolution, industrialization happened. And while the style of architecture we just got done looking at was very much individualized, we began to have the ability to mass produce objects. And that's exactly what happened. Assembly line. Um, if you and I both have the same car, they're identical with maybe some minor changes. But for the most part, we could create due to industrialization, we could create objects that we could produce very quickly and very precisely. And so the arts and crafts movement was actually a backlash to that because they felt that when you mass produce things, you lose individualism. You become this sea of identical copies, identical clones. And one of the things that happens whenever you create anything by hand is it automatically becomes one of a kind because of the flaws and blemishes inherent to working with the by hand. And so as the populations increased, right? So, we saw the influx of sanitation, improved sanitation because we now have plumbing. We saw the increase in our medicine and our science improve dramatically. We began having vaccines for things. And so what began to happen was people were having more comfortable lives. They were also being able to afford property, to have their own homes, have a family, acquire possessions. And so these two things, the demand for them and the ability to create them, started to grow the population. And as a result, a lot of people in the movement began to feel this, what they called the soulless machine-made production. And so what they wanted to do was try to bring back that feeling of individualism. And as you're going to see here, these are all unique custom homes. That was the whole purpose of the craftsman style, was that every home was different. Now, if you look at them, you're going to see a lot of similarities to what we saw in Victorian architecture because it's very similar. They just stripped off the gingerbread and replaced it with more natural, artsy, craftsy kind of materials. So instead of these very finely machine-tuned shakes, we now have hand-split shakes. The colors also got darker and more natural. And so the idea was that your house had a feel sort of along the lines of the arts and crafts style, which things are made from, natural materials, wood and the sort. And this is an example of a studio. And so the whole idea was to break off the grid. And that's why when we talk about flowing patterns, that very much was a strong attribute to arts and crafts design, as you can see here from a section of wallpaper. So the colors are more uniform. We do have, if we do have some detail, it's painted the same color so as to make it blend. So we've kind of gotten, we get, as we talked about, we start off simple in a movement, and then by the end of it, when people are sick of it, it just has become gaudy. And that's where the Victorian style of architecture had gotten. It had become very gaudy. And when I lived out in California, there are lots of Victorians out there. There were some that it was just like mind-boggling that anybody would choose that color scheme. There's like these bright saturated purples and bright saturated greens and these bright saturated blues and these bright saturated reds all in the same house. It was just insane. And so, this irregularity of, because you see these are all hand painted, so they're all different. And that is one of the things that the arts and crafts movement sought to get back to. So we have a lot of cottage, log cabin kind of feel. And now you're starting to see, some of these that started to break away more from Victorian asymmetrical. I mean, it's still asymmetrical, but there's less parts and pieces. You see a lot of houses like this around Atlanta. These are arts and crafts style houses. They're bungalows, cottages, a lot of those here. And you can see there's a feel that it's still holding on to some of the Victorian, but it's starting to become its own thing. Um, Actually, that is a model. Talk about that in a minute. So, the first ever arts and crafts house in terms of history is the Red House. And this was a house that was built in Great Britain. And I had a hard time finding any good photos of it, so they're a little blurry. And so the architect who developed this style said that he sought to relate to the moral and social health of a nation to the qualities of its architecture and designs. The decline of rural handicrafts, corresponding to the rise of industrialized society, in his mind, was a cause for concern for many designers and social reformers who feared the loss of traditional skills and creativity. And he wasn't wrong. If the Fox Theater, for some reason, were just to disappear one day, we probably do not have, and I don't want to offend anybody who's a brick mason, but we just don't have brick masons that do that type of work to have maintained that type of skill and creativity to be able to do that, to replace it. And so he was not wrong in his fear. It has come to pass where we can't afford to do that, some of the level of detailing that we used to do prior to the industrialization of the Industrial Revolution. And so it's become a lost art. Whoops, I just lost my next slide here. Okay, so obviously Awani Hotel is a commercial building, but since people stay in it, like temporarily live in it, I'm going to put it in our category of buildings we want to look at, just because it's really fabulous. And it's really starting to break away now from Victorian. And it is located in the Yosemite Valley, which is right here. And you can tell that it's right there because you see this half dome is this peak. It's very beautiful. It's very large. Bears there have learned how to get food by physically breaking into cars. They don't do that out here on the East Coast. I was trying to explain that to people. It's like bears don't break into cars on the East Coast. It's a West Coast thing. So they have, when you go camping there, you have to put your food in a metal locker so they can't get to it. It's just beautiful. It's really beautiful. It's just like I've been there. I lived in California, so I've been there multiple times, and just every season has its own beauty. And so that's why one of the nice things about the hotel is it sort of matches the beauty of the area. And you can still see a little bit of the Romanesque from the Victorian era here, but it's becoming its own. It's become its own style now. And you may all recognize this. The film The Shining was shot inside. The inside scenes were all shot inside the Awani Hotel, because it tied into the Native American symbolism. This is actually the hotel's called the Awani, but the Native American tribe that lived in the area was the Awanichi, if I said that correctly. And unfortunately, they were treated horribly and moved from their home during the gold rush, so that gold miners came in here to find gold. The hotel is quite beautiful with the motifs, and it's very, very arts and craftsy. I mean, when once you start to know that arts and crafts is about, that style of handmade goods, you see that in all of this. Just a different view. And so this is a very common style of home. There are a lot of those across the United States, in Canada, In other Western nations, it's quite popular. And you can see the darker colors, the more natural elements. There's less gingerbread. If there's any, it's painted the same color as the rest of the house. So it's kind of become its own thing. And there's some brighter colors starting to pop in. A lot of timber, right? It's all wood, but we have a lot of heavy timber, large timber that's being used because you see how long this is. You can do longer expanses with timber, heavy timber, which is basically shaved down log that's been dried, so that it's dry enough that it will not shrink any further, and then you can use it in construction. And this is close to 40 feet, and that's what you can do with heavy timber. And so, ironically, the arts and crafts movement eventually became a style that has become manufactured, and you can get this house and see this house as a manufactured element all over the nation. So what has happened is this is sort of where the arts and crafts movement has kind of moved to. It's sort of combined itself a little bit with the international style. But yeah, this is where it's gone to try to break away and break free from the fact that these houses are now mass produced, which is ironic to the style. Okay. Anyway, so we're going to leave it at that and end here.